Get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cristina Bolling from the Charlotte Ledger, and I wanted to welcome you to the Art of Aging Well webinar that we are holding in partnership with Caregiving Corner. We are so glad that you joined us today. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that is so important to many of us: how to put plans in place and navigate some of the complexities that come along with aging. Whether you're watching because you're seeking information or guidance for yourself or for a loved one, we hope that you find value in what you hear today. The Charlotte Ledger is happy to be working with Caregiving Corner to bring you this webinar. The Ledger is a local media company that provides smart and relevant information to the Charlotte region, including topics that are important to families and seniors. Caregiving Corner is a Charlotte-based geriatric care management and counseling firm whose mission is to empower families with education, resources, and support, helping them navigate the complexities of caregiving and ensure the best possible care for aging adults. At the end of our webinar, you'll have a chance to ask questions. And so if you have a question during the webinar, you'll see a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You can just click that and type in the question. The question will only be viewable by our moderator. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our speaker today. Jennifer Szakaly is the founder and CEO of Caregiving Corner, which is an 18-person firm providing care management and caregiver counseling services in the greater Charlotte area. They've been in business since 2005. Jennifer has a master's degree in gerontology from UNC Charlotte, and she's worked in the aging industry for more than 23 years. Jennifer currently serves on the national board of the Aging Life Care Association and is a fellow of the Leadership Academy there. That's a designation held by fewer than 50 care managers in the country. Jennifer also hosts the Caregiving Corner podcast, which educates the public on all things related to caregiving. Every time I hear her speak, I come away with so much knowledge, so I'm super excited to be getting the chance to do this webinar with her. Jennifer, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
Well, so it's so important that we're having this conversation because aging is so often a topic that we don't want to talk about. And then we find ourselves in a situation where we are forced to make decisions quickly. And decisions related to aging affect so many aspects of life, whether it's finances or housing, family relations, and more. So I'm really happy that we're talking about this today, and I hope everyone finds value in our conversation. I wanted to kick off, Jennifer, by asking you how you recommend that families even begin the conversations about aging, whether it's, an older adult who wants to talk to their children about plans and what could happen down the road, or if it's adult children who feel like now's the time to kind of talk to mom and dad or talk to that older family member about their expectations and, making plans for care. How do you get that conversation going?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you're right to point out that it doesn't necessarily have to be started by the older adult themselves or by the adult children. It just is something that needs to be talked about. So for both parties to come together and start the conversation about aging is so critical. It can be hard to talk about because I think a lot of people perceive the period of aging in their lives as as a time that is going to be characterized by frailty. I mean, I think we go to some of the negative stereotypes when we think about aging, and there's a real missed opportunity in not talking about it sooner to be able to really capture good information about what an older adult wants, or someone who's approaching older adulthood, and what they want their later years to be. And so that this notion of aging well it means something different to everyone. And so what is important for me as I age is going to be different than what's important to you. And so as families, we think we know the people that we're related to, but it's still important to have the conversations so that you're not wondering down the road if you're in a position of having to make a decision for someone. You don't want to ever be in a position where you're questioning, did I do the right thing? Is this what they would have wanted? And we see a lot of caregivers struggle with that because they didn't have the opportunity to have the conversation. So it is something important, and we really try to encourage families to start it under the auspices that aging is something that can be positive. So instead of launching into a conversation of, Dad, what do you want me to do when you need care? That automatically sets the stage that you're thinking about when Dad is going to be more feeble than he is right now. And so that's probably going to put Dad on the defensive. Dad doesn't want to be thinking about himself in that way. And so you're kind of setting the conversation up to go in a negative direction. So I think, in terms of getting it started, just talking about it as a chapter of your life, similar to how we would engage, children when we ask them, if they're going to college, what are you going to study? What do you hope to do? Same thing with people that are approaching retirement. What's important to you as you retire? What are the things that you hope to accomplish during older adulthood? So asking open-ended questions to try to elicit conversation that's going to really bring forward information about what their goals and preferences are, but then also some of the things that they may value. And the things that we value, change in different life phases. So it's really important to be asking those questions and not make the assumption that you know the information. I think the other thing that's really critical about starting this conversation is I tell people, if you haven't had the conversation today, it's not too late to have it today. If you haven't had it yet, you really don't want to wait until you're in a crisis before you stop and start asking some of these questions, because emotions are going to be at an all-time high. No one's thinking clearly. People are pretty raw about what's going on, what they're dealing with, what they're coping with. And so you definitely want to have the conversation when it can be done in a way where you can give some thoughtful consideration to what you want to ask, but then also, if you're the person answering the questions, how you'd like to answer the questions.
Sometimes those conversations, like you just said, are hard, and not everybody wants to participate in them at the same time. So how do you navigate through if there are barriers, if there are roadblocks, if there are people who might be resistant, but you feel like from whatever seat you may be in, whether you're the aging adult or maybe the family member, breaking through those barriers and starting that conversation when maybe there's some hostility on the other side?
Right. So I think probably our tip in that situation is that it would be a good idea to try to engage a third party at some point in the conversation. Sometimes that's a doctor because you're dealing with a medical situation. So sometimes getting a doctor to start the conversation of what a trajectory with a certain chronic condition is going to look like. Some people turn to their faith communities for conversations as they approach their later years. And aging life care managers are an excellent resource. Sometimes when you take it out of the family, you immediately empower the older adult to answer a little bit more honestly the questions. We've had a number of clients that have said, well, when my daughter asks me a question, she's up to something. She's about to tell me what I should be doing different. And so for better or for worse, families are what they are, and there are lots of dynamics with the parent-child relationship or between two spouses. And so sometimes bringing a third party in, we find that some people are a lot more forthcoming with us than they are even with their own families. And again, I think it's because we come to the table with no judgment about what we're asking and about the answers that they may have to some of the questions. So, if it helps to start the conversation with someone else to kind of get things going, that may be the best way to launch the conversation.
So let's say that you're not necessarily in a situation that is emergent, that you have the ability to make some plans out towards the future. I think that something that goes through a lot of people's minds is there are so many things, so many ways this could play out. There are so many things that could happen. How do you make a plan when you have no idea what medical diagnoses might be coming down the road? What other mobility challenges or lifespan? I mean, none of us know these things. How do you make a plan when you don't have any idea, perhaps, what is coming down the pike or when it's coming down the pike? How do you begin?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we get that question a lot, and sometimes it comes from the older adult themselves. They will say, well, we don't know what's going to happen. I may not be around for much longer. So why would I spend all this time planning, or why do I want to think about all of this? And, you know, the answer to that question of why is that we want to, as best as possible, try to put a plan in place that sets an older adult up for the most success to be able to age well, again, whatever that means to them. Um, and we want to do it in such a way that also allows for a lot of flexibility, knowing that there are a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's right around the corner. So when we put a care plan in place for a client and we're walking them through the options that, that they have that are realistic for their situation, for their budget, for their for their family dynamics, for their care needs, those sorts of things. It's intended to be a fluid document. It's something that's going to change and be updated as their circumstances change. I think one of the things that we tell people is that choosing not to have a plan is a plan. And so if you elect to go into your later years, just saying, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. We're not there yet. I'm fine. I don't need to think about this. I'm going to wait and see what transpires. That is your plan. Your plan is to shoot from the hip and take things as they come. And what we can almost guarantee after doing this for 20 years is that people that do that, people that have no plan or no advanced consideration of anything related to aging, are much less likely to be happy with what ends up happening to them and for them. And then they also experience far less satisfaction when it comes to actually achieving what it is that they wanted to achieve in terms of preferences and goals later in life. And we're not talking about major things. We're talking about, I want to be able to stay in my home as long as possible. That seems small. It is a major thing though for our clients. And so again, if you don't have a plan for how you're going to be able to stay at home, chances are very good that at some point you're not going to be able to, because you didn't do enough advanced planning and consideration and making yourself familiar with the supports that you're going to need to have in place. So that's what we try to offer to people. If there's a lot of resistance to the conversation and to this idea of let's talk about these things, if they say, why, we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what's around the corner, let's just wait and see, or I don't need care now. That's what we get a lot of times. I don't need care yet. That's exactly when you should be talking about what you want things to look like down the road is when you don't need any assistance. So definitely we try to get people away from this mindset of just waiting and seeing what's around the corner, because you're going to have much poorer outcomes. And then I think the other thing about having a plan and having a lot of unknowns is that there are a lot of people that will go through the work of saying, if this, then that, these are all of the things that I prefer. This is the community I'd like to live in. I would like to stay at home. These are the things that I would like for someone to do if they're taking care of me. These are the things that I don't prefer to have happen. All of those little nuggets of information, should there be an emergency or something catastrophic that happens where your family is suddenly thrown into the unenviable position of having to make decisions for you in place of you, those little nuggets of information give them some reassurance and peace of mind that they're doing right by you. And I can't overstate rather what a blessing that is to families, for people to not have the burden of wondering if mom or dad would have been okay with this. And so the people that go into caregiving with no information, with no sense of understanding if their parent would have wanted them to make the decision that they're about making, it creates so much uncertainty and doubt and guilt within the caregiver that it really is a true gift to families to at least go through the process of building a plan for aging well, so that your family has the blueprint to stick as close to possible as they can if they find themselves in a position where they're making decisions for you.
So do you recommend that a family start a document, put these things down in writing, so that no one's drawing on their memory of what mom or dad said, or that siblings maybe aren't disagreeing with what the wishes were and that kind of thing? Like, do you recommend, and I mean, how granular should people get in terms of like, as they're hearing about resources, making notes of those so that if the time comes that they are able to, mobilize if needed? I guess, how detailed and how in writing should the plan be, maybe when you're in the beginning phases even?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really comes down to the person. If you're very detail oriented, then you probably need to be the type of person that's come up with a lot of if this, then that scenarios. And so thinking through I want to stay at home, but if it gets to the point where I have to have someone here with me at night or living with me to take care of me, then I wouldn't want that. And so I would want to go into a care community. There are people that have very specific thoughts about, what they would like for someone to be doing if they have a family member taking care of them. The reason that it's important to have the conversations also is that you might find that some caregivers have very strong opinions. So we've worked with couples, for example, where the husband might say, I would love to take care of my wife as long as possible, but I already know that if it gets to the point where she needs assistance with toileting, that's not something I feel comfortable doing because I'd like to still think of her as my wife and I'd like to have that relationship with her. And that just kind of crosses a boundary for me that would change things. That's a great piece of information to know going into a situation for both of them, for them to know that there's kind of a mental block for the husband if he were to become the caregiver. So a lot of people, I will say that if you have a strong opinion about something, it's really important, no matter how general or specific it is, it's really important for that bit of information to be factored in. But there are people that are big picture people that will, they just kind of want to focus on the big concepts, and so their communication with family might be, I'd really like to go into a large retirement community, but other than that, I'm really comfortable with whatever you all end up having to do, or I'd really like to stay in the state that I'm in right now, whether that's North Carolina or somewhere else. I really don't want to be moved away from my network of friends. And then again, there are people that are very granular that take it on a very detailed level that, I would like to stay at home until we have to do X number of dollars of home renovation, and then it wouldn't be worth it. And so then I would want my family to do X, Y, Z to provide care for me. And so I think it just kind of depends on what people's comfort level is. We don't ever, when we're having the conversation with families, we don't ever have the expectation that someone's going to be giving us super detailed preferences. We're really just starting the conversation with big topics and big things to think about. And then if you do have somebody that's detail oriented, you can definitely let the conversation drift that way. I encourage people to make it fun. This has come up on our podcast before. Jen, my podcast co-host, her parents went away to Hilton Head. I remember them talking about this years ago in the industry, and they spent the weekend. So they turned it into a mini vacation, and they documented all of their preferences. They thought about, when would I want someone taking care of me at home? What do I expect from my spouse? What do I want money to be spent on as far as care? What are my priorities? And when would I want to go into a care community? And if I do, what would I want that place to be like, or what would I find important there? They knocked it out and they documented, and they continue to update that binder as things change. And so I think that's a great way of doing it. They worked in the industry, so not everybody's going to have the intimate knowledge that they did about the different services. But again, that might be a good reason to sit down with somebody that's in the industry who can help you walk through all of the different possibilities that are out there. But that's the other piece of having the conversation that I think people miss, is that a lot of people, particularly older adults now, they have in their mind being taken to the home or the nursing home, and that kind of proverbial next and last place. And 2 generations ago, there were nursing homes, and that was it, and they weren't great. And a lot of them were state run, and there wasn't much to choose from. Now there are so many options. There are retirement communities. There are 55 plus active communities, assisted livings, memory care communities. There's just so many things being offered that people are really missing out by not having the conversation because they don't even really know what all the services are, that they could be tapping into to build a really robust plan for themselves.
How do you recommend that people even do that research? Because like you said, I mean, I write about this quite often, and even I feel like I'm constantly learning things and saying, "Oh my gosh, I did not know that that was a thing." So, I mean, if you're kind of just entering this world, how do you even know what your choices are when you go to that? I love the idea of that Hilton Head getaway or whatever. Do a
Yeah,
staycation and just like, order some really good food and hunker down and get the plan in place. I love that. But how do you know what's out there? How do you do that
exactly. Yeah.
research?
Well, I think that's where using a professional, as care managers, that's part of our job, and we try to save people the time that they would spend researching. You could go down kind of the black hole of Google. I will say that a lot of senior businesses are small, and so not all of the businesses have a robust marketing budget, and so there's some caution in trying to rely on searches um, and whether or not you've heard of something to be an endorsement of whether or not it's a good company or not, because a lot of providers in the senior space are small businesses. And so I would say that Google is going to get you part of the way there. The cautionary piece about that is that typically the people that write Google reviews are the ones that are unhappy. So we get a lot of concerns from families that say, "Gosh, I looked up this community and they just said they have 2 stars Google reviews, and we have to explain to them that we have clients that might be living in those different communities or using those service providers that are having positive experiences, and so you've got to take the feedback online with a grain of salt. You know, with the kind of uh, surge of use of AI, I've kind of played around a little bit with Chat GPT to see how much of a competitor that might be for what we're doing. And the reality is that people really want advice and recommendations that are specific to their situation. And so if you're researching, if you're asking AI, if you're looking on Google, you're just going to get information given back to you based on the quality of the questions that you're answering. So, if I'm sitting down with someone, I might say, and as an introvert, this is very important. I might say, "Do you like to be in social settings?" I'm very sensitive to that as an introvert, and so that's a question that I ask clients, because if they say no, I really value time on my own, then recommending that they go to a community, as fabulous as it might be, that has 200 residents and has a very active and expected social scene, is probably not a good option. Does it mean that that place is not good? Not at all. But it means that for that person, it's not going to be a good fit. And that's the kind of nuanced information that you can't get from a Google search. It's a good place to start if you're in a pinch, but really talking with somebody that's in the industry is the best way to go.
I wanted to just take a minute to remind folks that if you have a question for Jennifer, we will be asking questions toward the end of the webinar. So feel free to click the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can just type the question in. It won't be visible to the whole webinar. It'll just be visible to our moderator, and we'd be happy to have Jennifer answer some questions towards the end. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Jennifer, I wanted to ask you, so I think a lot of people approach aging with some expectations. It may be, I expect that my children will take me into their home and care for me with all my needs. It could be that I expect I'm going to have a lot of money, or I'm not going to have a lot of money. Or sometimes it seems like expectations and the realities of what things cost might not be in line. How do you go about setting really realistic expectations? And how do you help somebody through that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal, and I think that causes probably the most angst and emotional kind of turmoil within families as they're dealing with an aging loved one, whether it's a spouse or a parent. Is when the expectations that were sometimes never verbalized are not being met, and so sometimes we discover that that's kind of the root cause of behavior or someone's unhappiness, is that we realize that they had unrealistic or different expectations of a situation. So I will address first, the parent child. I think, 2 generations ago, women were not working and we were at home and we were the ones that took care of aging parents. We raised kids and then we took care of aging parents, both sets of aging parents. In the span of 2 generations now, that's completely changed. And most households are double income households. And so women are balancing, just as men are, careers, marriages, raising children, and taking care of aging parents. And so we see a lot more compartmentalization where, there's not one family member who's kind of the de facto, this person is going to be the caregiver for mom and dad. Anymore, because everyone's in the workplace. And so who does actually have time to be that person? So again, that's another reason why it's super important to be having the conversation. Unfortunately, because there are generational differences, you might end up in a situation, depending on the age of the older adult, where they have, and this will happen to all of us as we age, we will have expectations that are based on our values and how we came through society as a cohort. And so some older adults today still have the value or the belief that their adult children or their family members are going to be the primary people who take care of them. I cannot reiterate how important it is that if you feel that way, you need to start verbalizing that to family, because that's something that either family, if they are going to do this for you, need to be prepared and know how they're going to extricate themselves from a job or from other responsibilities to be able to have time to be a hands-on caregiver. But I think it's also unfair to have that expectation without ever verbalizing that expectation. And so that's kind of where some things can start to fall off the track. The other thing that we hear really impacts spouses. We have people that will say, well, my vow, they have a sense that their marriage vows have put them in a position where I have to be the person that takes care of this person. And so we come into some situations where the client is married, and we see that the spouse who is their caregiver is just on the brink of burnout. This person cannot manage much more, but their response to us is, "I've got to keep doing this. I am this person's husband, or I'm this person's wife. I've got to keep moving forward. This is what I promised to do." And when it's appropriate and we can, the pushback that I kind of give on that is that the vows probably created a sense that you should be providing for them to receive care, but the idea that it obligates you to be the person who's actually giving the care is a pressure you're putting on yourself. And what we will sometimes say that is impactful to people is that you are the only person that can be the best husband for your wife. And so from this point forward, that's your job. That's the best thing that you can do for your wife, is to be the best husband. But that doesn't mean that you have to be the caregiver. That's a completely separate job. And so getting people to understand that being a spouse doesn't mean being a caregiver, that those can be 2 separate jobs filled by 2 different people, and that they're actually the best ones to fill that spot of spouse, and that they're the only ones that have that honor. That's an empowering way of communicating that to them. And sometimes that just helps them release that burden and turn over to someone else the caregiving responsibilities. When we are dealing with spouses, I will say that we are just as concerned about the well spouse, the person who's the caregiver, as we are our client, because they are going to be aging very quickly as a caregiver. They are going to be more likely to experience burnout. And so we really want to work with them as early as possible to help them set good boundaries for themselves so that they can focus on self-care and have realistic expectations about what care may end up looking like if they are going to be caring for a spouse. I think the other thing, the last thing I'll say about, kind of expectations is that, the expectations that are communicated to people, you still need to know that it's done so with kind of an asterisk beside it, that things may change. There may always be an unexpected incident or something where if you said to your loved one, I'm going to do everything that I can to keep you at home, there may come a time that that's not possible. And you shouldn't be beating yourself up for the failure of not keeping them home, and instead flip it and see the glass as half full and say, look at how long I was able to keep this person at home. And so some of our job really just gets to be reframing for families and for caregivers how they should kind of reframe the narrative in their head so that they can get into a healthier mindset about what the expectations are going into this. But I can't say enough about, if you have really strong expectations, either for yourself as someone who is aging or as a spousal caregiver or an adult child, if you know that you have certain things that you expect from someone else, that definitely needs to be communicated sooner rather than later so that that can be factored into planning.
Jennifer, one thing that I know affects so many families is like, okay, speaking from maybe a child's perspective, an adult child's perspective, a parent who really wants to stay in their home, but isn't maybe realistic about how much care they need or, about what kind of care they need. How do you navigate that when there may be expectations on the part of the parent that they think that they can really age in place, but the child is worried that maybe they're in a situation that would be unsafe, or it doesn't seem like a good idea anymore. How do you get through that?
Right. Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So we actually the way that I approach this is we sort of start this at the end, and what I will go in and say to people, because to be honest, and anywhere that I speak and talk to groups of people, I always ask for a show of hands of who is excited about moving into a nursing home or an assisted living community. And very few people raise their hands, right? We all want to stay at home. We all want to stay at home. And that's what everyone will tell you time and time again. But when we sit down to have that conversation, I start with what I know the total cost will look like. And I will say to the older adult, if you have home care through a traditional home care agency, the cost right now, today, of 24-hour care is going to be about $25,000 a month. And that sticker shock alone jolts people into reality. And so then I can say to them, if that's not sustainable for you, and it's not for a lot of people, then let's work backwards and let's talk about what you can afford. And then I'll help you translate that into what that's going to look like in terms of you being able to support yourself at home. And if I know that you've got $10,000 to spend, I can build a plan that's going to revolve around that budget. And I will be able to say to you, when it gets to this point and this starts to happen, we will need to pivot and switch gears to this second kind of phase of the plan. But yeah, we have a lot of people that still think that Medicare is going to pay for in-home care. We have people that think that they misunderstand, rightfully so. I mean, Medicare is complicated to understand, right? None of this is easy for even the most educated amongst us to really be able to fully understand. And then add to that, if you're in the midst of a crisis and you're trying to understand Medicare, you can forget it. It's impossible. But a lot of people have misconceptions about how care is going to be paid for. And so when we start talking to them and they realize that this is an out-of-pocket, self-funded cost, that really changes things. And then, of course, what we've seen with the economic changes the past few days, people's buying power shifts. And so your buying power is ultimately going to be one of the biggest deciders of what your plan for care looks like, because in the United States, care is self-funded. And so you've got to be prepared for the costs that come along with that. So if that price is shocking to anyone, as I imagine it probably is to a lot of people, we start with that to help people understand that we get it. We understand. We're in the same page as you. I would love to be able to stay in my home until the day that I die. We validate that and respect that preference. However, there's realistic limitations to that. And so this is what the end game is going to look like. And that's just one service. That's not all of the services you could potentially need. And so that really does help facilitate the conversation. And some people find that they have preferences for when money is spent. Some people will say, I'd really like for more money to be spent on my care up front. You know, when I can enjoy amenities, I'd like to be in a really nice independent community where I can play pickleball and go to the theater and enjoy what Charlotte has to offer. And then, yeah, that's going to put me in a position where I have less buying power later on, but I'm okay with that. So again, those are just things that, you know, everybody's expectations are different. So just knowing those expectations is so critical.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about is setting expectations, or I guess it's not setting expectations, but dealing with the realities of a big change. So let's say that you may have had to help that aging adult make a transition into, an assisted living care community or something like that, um, what the expectation should be in terms of how quickly one adjusts to a new situation like that, feeling like, oh my goodness, we've had to make this big change and there was resistance and it's not going well. And, what are the expectations around maybe a big change that might have had to happen that you weren't expecting, or that maybe wasn't the first choice, because the first choice wasn't available.
Right, right. So I want to say from the outset that the expectation about care anywhere um, should be lowered, and not that we should settle for less, but providing care is a people business, and people are going to make mistakes, and so inherent in the fact that people are providing care for you either in the home or in care communities, there are going to be things that you don't like about how that care is provided. Obviously, we can have proper expectations, but I just say that because I think some people go into an assisted living community or into a care community thinking that things are going to be without mistakes and that things are going to flow smoothly for the duration, and that's simply not the case. So it's going to be a little bit bumpy. Having said that, I will say that everybody's experience of transitioning into a care community is very different. One of the surprising things that we found over the years is that it is across the board harder for the family members than it is for the older adult. And I think it's because they perceive the change as something that is necessary and possibly more negative. And they also recognize that as family members, they may be the people that are in a position where they sort of receive the blowback if it doesn't go well. And so they're bracing themselves for, this is not going to work. Mom's not going to like this. This is going to be horrible. She's going to be asking to leave in a week. Whereas what we find from the older adults' perspective is that, yes, it may not be something that they want to do. The communities that we have in the Charlotte area, we're fortunate. We've got a lot of great options. And if people move into one that is well suited for what their needs are and has the right, offerings in terms of, activities and level of engagement and that sort of thing, we see people flourish in community setting. We see people flourish when we've added a caregiver to their home and that person is able to now take them out, and maybe they are able to go out to lunch now. They're no longer driving, but their caregiver is able to take them to do all the things that they once enjoyed doing. So we see the opposite from the older adult. Now, that's not without exception. There certainly are people that have a very difficult time with transition, and it is very difficult for the older adult to kind of get through that phase. But I would say overwhelmingly a majority of people, it's the opposite, where it's a positive thing. There's a little bit of settling in time, but they value the sense of community, and people recognize that it's nice to be around people that can understand what you're going through. Charlotte is a city of a lot of transplants when it comes to older adults. We have a lot of people that moved here for jobs from other areas, and then they brought their family members after the fact. And so we have a lot of older adults here from other areas of the country. And a lot of people have enjoyed being in communities where they can meet other people from New York or other people from Florida, or, other people that maybe grew up in the Midwest or had similar experiences, where if they were at home or they were only being cared for by family members, that might not have been, their sense of community. So we always tell people, don't write it off yet. You don't know that it's not going to work, and we've got to give it a shot. There are also a lot of great supports in place. A lot of people don't realize that Medicare pays for people, for older adults to receive counseling services. And so one of the first things that we'll do is plug counseling services in with a Medicare provider so that that person can have some support through the transition. And that's helpful as well. And then sometimes, it's just a matter, again, of reframing for the family what visits are going to look like now when they go see their parents or grandparents or spouse, and trying to figure out how they can keep their relationship intact and yet allow there to be some change since there's been this change in living arrangement.
I just wanted to invite people to put questions in the Q&A button. Click the Q&A button if you have any questions for Jennifer, and we'll get to those shortly. Jennifer, just bouncing off the topic that you were just talking about, I mean, how can family members help loved ones adapt to change? What are some ways that family members can kind of help get people through maybe these big shifts that are happening in their lives?
Yeah, I think I think the one thing that we see that presents some challenges is that um, we need to acknowledge that when something challenging or negative happens to an older adult, a new diagnosis or a loss of something, a loss of being able to drive, a loss, something that represents a loss of independence, we need to acknowledge it. There are a lot of people that just don't want to talk about it because they might feel badly. They know that it's going to be something negative, and so by not bringing it up to their parents or to their spouse, it's almost like they're trying to kind of sweep it under the rug and not acknowledge it. And we just need to kind of call it out for what it is and say to the person, I know that this is really difficult. I can't imagine what it would be like to not be able to drive anymore. But here is a plan that we have, or here's how we're going to tackle this, or this is what we're going to do. And again, having a conversation around that kind of smaller topic, whatever it is. When people come to us, I tell people that when older adults reach out to us, they have wants. I want to stay at home. I want to keep driving. I want to manage my own medications. I want to go to the doctor by myself. When adult children call us, they call us with needs. I need to know mom is safe. I need to know dad has taken his medicine. I need to know mom's not going to drive, excuse me, on 77 and have an accident. So what we try to get people to understand is that just because it sounds like the need and the want are at opposite ends of the spectrum, they're really not. And there's a lot of opportunity for compromise. But in order to get there, you've got to be willing to talk about the issue that is uncomfortable, that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And I think the tendency to just kind of say, well, yep, as though it's a milestone, dad can't drive anymore. And that's all that we say about it, is kind of discounting the emotional impact of that life event for him. And I think it needs to be, recognized. I think the other thing is that when there are really profound changes and again, this goes back to talking about it, it's okay to say to the person, I know that this is not what you wanted things to be like. Um, this is not what any of us wanted for you. I think saying that out loud really acknowledges that we're going to be sad about this in the moment, but then we've got to circle the wagons and we've got to figure out what the plan is and what we're going to do about it. But yeah, we're going to be sad about this diagnosis right now, or we're going to be sad about this change that we didn't see coming, and figure out how we can get around that. And that's where you really see families come together and and work together as a unit, to kind of push through something that's that's more sad, a more sad piece of aging.
I wanted to get to a couple of the questions that we have coming in. Someone asks, is there an outline of options that one can print out to help facilitate the conversation with family? If you don't know what you don't know, it's pretty hard to discuss.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, so that's a good. Yeah, we do have some tools that we can make available that are at least good starting points. There are there is a tool called Five Wishes that some people might be familiar with. It's kind of specific to end of life, but the reason that I like that is it gets people thinking about end of life in a very different way, and it's really all about like how you experience physical comfort and what you would want people to know about you at end of life. And so, for example, your 5 wishes, it might be that you would like for there to be warm blankets available to you all the time. I mean, that sounds like something small, but if you are in bed and you are at end of life and you can't communicate, think about how much better your experience is going to be, and how much, um, again, how appreciative your family is going to be to be able to see your documented wishes and carry those out. So there are some different tools, and we can definitely, definitely make those available. I think that just the biggest conversations that we find are um, location, talking about where the person is going to age. Are you going to stay in your home? Do you want to relocate to be near us in Charlotte? Do you want to be in a 55 plus community? Do you want to continue to downsize every time you need care? Do you want to be on a large campus that provides all the levels of care? Just having some of those general conversations about where care is going to take place will start the process of the person telling you what some of their preferences are. But yeah, we can definitely make some tools available.
The 5 wishes, is that something that we can just Google and find on the internet? How do you
Yeah,
get to the five
yeah, you
wishes?
can
Okay.
Google. Yes, yeah, yeah. You can look for 5 wishes. Yeah, yeah, and you know, you could sort of translate that concept into a lot of different things. And I think about this when I go see a client in a care community. When I walk in their door, I will ask them questions like, do you want me to leave the light on? Do you want me to open up your blinds? Do you want me to close your blinds when I leave? Do you want me to close your door? And again, those are all very small things, but it's demonstrating respect for the fact that this is a person that still has preferences, and that you, as the person who has come to see them in whatever capacity, has the ability to do very small things that honor and respect those preferences. And so, if we think about how that can be translated into planning, there are so many different ways that we, as professionals or families, can document some of those preferences. To be able to make sure that that person has a better care experience. A good example of that is that in the South, if you're working with caregivers that are from this area, it is more common for them to use some sort of nickname, or for them to say, Miss Christina instead of Miss Bolling. And so if your loved one is coming from a different area where that would be seen as disrespectful, no disrespect is meant by that. But if they would be offended if they were called Miss Christina, then that's something really important that we need to communicate to the caregivers. And so again, it's little things like that, but they're not little. When you are living in a care community or at home with care is a really big deal. And so little things like that we can do to make your preferences known, and so that you're, as the older adult, not experiencing so much kind of agitation about the situation because it's rubbing you the wrong way. The more of that we as families and care managers can set up for you in advance is going to be a more successful experience of receiving care.
We got a really interesting and important question. Someone's saying that when they're looking at options, they're familiar with a place for mom, and they're wondering what other services help with senior living, senior hospital care, end of life.
Yeah. So Place for Mom works very different than care management services. It's kind of the opposite of our model. So placement organizations like a Place for Mom are compensated by the communities where they place an individual. And so the services are free and to the family, but they are being compensated after that person is placed, the person that you're working with. Care management, on the other hand, works the opposite, where our services do cost. When we're working for our clients, it's in our best interest to make a recommendation that suits them, and we have a vested interest in doing so, because as care managers, we're going to continue to be involved with your care on an ongoing basis, typically for the duration of your life. And so we don't just need you to successfully move in and settle in well. We are going to be involved if problems come up down the road and that sort of thing. It's against our code of ethics, nationally, as aging life care managers, for us to receive fees from any of the service providers that we refer to. So it's a very different model than a place for mom is.
So again, I mean, for care managers, you are helping people make the right choices, maybe to enter a community, but you are seeing what's going on in those communities and are able to help people make adjustments or yeah, to smooth things, maybe if there are rough patches and things like that during their time there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And sometimes, when people come to us, we, again, in terms of sort of the long-term planning piece, we also might look at a situation and realize that, maybe moving to a community at this particular moment is premature, because maybe care could be provided at home at a lower cost point. And so in that respect, we're looking at big picture. We're looking at, is this person ever going to need to use Medicaid? Do they have long-term care insurance? What's the best way to bring in those benefits? Do they qualify for VA benefits? And so looking at the big picture and the family dynamics, there's a lot to consider more than just dad needs assisted living. Where do we send them? And sometimes we will get calls where people call us and they just need a name of a place. And that's not really how we operate. And it's not because we're trying to keep it secret, but there could be a place that's great for client A, but for your dad, it would be a horrible fit because of his preferences. So again, this kind of goes back to getting to know the client and getting to know what it is that they're hoping to get, out of the experience of community living, if that's where they're headed.
We got a comment or a question here from somebody who said that they used a professional like yourself to help them make a good decision for help finding care for a nursing home for their mom in suburban Chicago, and said that looking at inspections was very helpful, but he said one place that had great inspections was upon visiting not good. So kind of the importance of doing your sort of homework that you could find with inspections, but then also going and visiting. So how do you even navigate that?
Yeah, so one of our team members actually is a former state surveyor. And so whenever we have a client that needs placement in a long-term care community, we pull her in and we say, can you translate these reports for us? And so she can, look at the reports. And, the Medicare star rating system, if people aren't familiar with that, there's a 5-star rating system for communities. And, there is some truth to the stars, but as the person pointed out with that comment, you can have. There have been times where we have 5-star communities, and they're not places that we have on our list to refer clients to because of some client experiences. And then the opposite of that is true. We've had some really stellar experiences at 2-star facilities. So again, it goes back to what are we actually seeing day to day when our clients are there, and the ability for us to be able to look at those reports and have somebody that's very knowledgeable look at the deficiencies and say, all things considered, this deficiency for this client is the one that we should be paying attention to and not this. And so that's been very helpful to families as well. So yeah, it's you definitely don't want to just depend on one source of information, for a decision. So depending solely on a Medicare star ranking system, that would be the equivalent of me coming to your home, Christina, one day a year, not telling you when that's going to be, and then evaluating your housekeeping skills based on yes, I know, based on what I see that one day. So I don't think any of us are are up for that. So it has its drawbacks. So it's a data point, but it shouldn't be the only data point.
Great. If people have more questions, feel free. We still have a little bit of time, so feel free to submit more questions if you have them. Jennifer, when someone is making a visit to, a care facility, to see if that might be a good option for their loved one or for themselves, of course, what should they be looking for?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we tell people is that if you're taking a tour, and this is particularly true if you're not sure what level of care your loved one needs, or if they're even ready for living in community. What I tell people is, if you go into a community, you really want to see other residents that remind you of your loved one. So similar functioning status, just because there's two assisted livings does not mean that they are the same population of residents at each assisted living. And so you really want to look at, is this group super active? Are they watching TV? Are they very social? Are they engaged? Are most of them using assistive devices? None of that is bad or good. It's simply what you're observing. And you need to see whether or not that is similar to what your loved one, what their position would be. Having been in this industry for a long time, I can tell you that the people that are in independent living communities today, 25 years ago, they would have been in assisted living. They would have never been able to be in independent living. And so we've seen this whole shift of acuity where now the people that are in assisted living are people that, again, 25 years ago might have already needed memory supported living or a transition to a skilled nursing or a higher level of care. And so because we've seen that shift, everything can also shift within buildings. So you go to a community, you want to be able to see that there are, some people that your loved one, would be able to interact with. I tell people to check the food. Food is a really big deal for our clients. It's, a huge luxury that people are kind of picky about, as we all are. So check out the food and then look at the activities. The activities calendar is posted. Check to see what's going on in the communities and are they activities that your loved one would be interested in. And then if possible, see if you can chat with one of the residents or a family member of the residents. Very often, if you're touring, you might see somebody that you would be able to chat with and you can talk to them about what their experiences have been. Again, knowing that no place is perfect, but you get some really good feedback from the residents and their families.
Did you ask about turnover? I know that turnover is such a huge issue in a lot of, care facilities.
Right. It's a good question to ask, although I'm not sure how it necessarily is going to be answered in a way that's going to be super helpful, only because we find that the places that have experienced high turnover don't necessarily characterize it that way. One of the unfortunate things in our industry is that really since COVID, care communities across the board have been impacted by high rates of turnover. We had a lot of people that left the caregiving profession during COVID because of how difficult working in healthcare was. And so unfortunately, a lot of places are shorter staffed than they used to be and are still struggling to get a really consistent group of caregivers. That's a whole nother topic for another webinar, but there's a lot there. So again, that would be maybe a helpful bit of information to know, but a turnover rate by itself is not necessarily going to tell you, yes or no, whether or not it's a good place, so to speak.
Gotcha. We have about 1 minute left, but someone did just ask about how you charge for your services with Caregiving Corner.
Yeah. So care managers in the Charlotte area charge an hourly rate for our services. The range of rates in Charlotte is $140 to $155. Our company charges $150 an hour, and we're available, for consultations if needed. If people have loved ones that are in other areas, I love to be able to introduce families to care managers across the country. So if you're watching this and your aging parent is in a different state, there are people like me all over the country. So we can get you connected to somebody that is an aging life care manager that can help you kind of boots on the ground to wherever your loved one is. In some markets, they charge differently. There might be markets that charge package rates, but in the Charlotte market, we are all charging by the hour.
Okay, this is going to be a little lightning round because we've had a couple of questions just come in.
Okay.
I think we can answer these quickly. One is, how can we do a deep dive? This doesn't sound like a lightning round question. How can we do a deep dive to determine the true financial stability of a retirement community? Ooh.
Yes. Well, you might actually be able to better answer that question. It's difficult. I mean, there are tax, as we've learned, through the ledger's reporting over the past 18 months. There are tax documents that you can look at if it's a nonprofit organization. I will say that with for-profit, it's difficult. It is. I get an email newsletter every day, and almost every day there's news of corporate buyouts, mergers, acquisitions happening on a national scale for senior living communities or care organizations. And so it's kind of the wild, wild west out there as far as who's going to be the next owner of any given building. So that's a bit of a variable that families have to contend with. And it's unfortunate because they're looking at this from a care perspective, and care is a business. And so, the businesses are operating as such and need to continue to be profitable. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy that people have to come to terms with as they're navigating this. But yeah, we'd be happy to chat offline about specific communities if they had specific questions.
Great. And I'll just really quick to let people know, if you go to the Department of Insurance, NCDOI, North Carolina Department of Insurance, you can do a search for continuing care retirement communities disclosure statements. You'll get a list, and you can click on links and you can read all about their financials and their organization and everything like that. That will help you kind of get a little sense for how they're doing. So that's just my little tip. You're the expert, but I have a little tip there.
Yes.
Okay, I think this is a great place to wrap up. Jennifer, it's been amazing. You are just such a wealth of information, and I can't thank you enough for sharing all of this with us.
Thank you. It's been great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so if obviously you're registered today watching us, you're going to get an email later on today that will have a recording of this webinar, and you're welcome to rewatch it, share it with a friend. There will also be some resources there. If you have additional questions for Jennifer that we either didn't get to or you didn't get to ask, you can certainly reach out to her. She's gracious to give us her email is info@caregivingcorner.com. So feel free to drop her a line with the question, and she and her team will get back to you. But we just thank you so much for joining us today. Jennifer, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Have a good one.